This is Dear Strategy, episode 139. Welcome to another episode of Dear Strategy, where we answer all of your questions about product, business, and personal strategy. I'm your host, Bob Caparelli, and this is episode 139, being recorded in January of 2024. May not be released in January of 2024. I'm kind of recording a few episodes back to back because there's nothing about these episodes that are related to current events necessarily. So I have the recording studio set up, so I may as well record a few. So today I want to go back to another strategy lesson. As you know, we kind of go back and forth on this show between rants about current events and things like that, and, real life lessons that companies could apply, kind of academic things about strategy and everything surrounding developing a strategy. And today I want to really touch on this concept of value. So of course, when we think about value, you could apply that terminology to a lot of different things. A lot of people will talk about value in terms of a value proposition, which is essentially the value that you're bringing to a customer, either in the form of a product or a service. If you provide either one of those things, customers are consuming those things, and they're consuming those things because they're getting some value out of it. So the value proposition would be some way that you could state what that value is. What are customers getting from your product? And it's really important when you're defining value through the lens of a value proposition that you think past the features of your product and really move more towards the benefits, and even more than that, what those benefits are doing for a customer. So a lot of times, and I use this approach as well, people kind of use a cascading approach of starting with features, moving to benefits, and then moving to value or results, as I like to call them, that customers are getting. So for example, if I am buying high-speed internet, right? That's something that I'm consuming as a customer. And so a feature of high-speed internet might be 1 gigabyte download speed. That's a feature. That feature in and of itself is not a value proposition because I don't know what that feature does. Is that feature good? Is it bad? Does it have any benefit? Does it have any value to my life? Don't know. So what you need to do is look at that feature and then say, well, what benefit does that feature bring to a customer? And so in this particular case, the feature of gigabyte speed, the benefit that it provides is that it allows you to download things without glitching. It allows you to have more bandwidth in your household so you can have multiple streaming devices going at one time. It allows you to not have to wait as long for websites, and it allows you to perform higher level tasks than if you had slower speed internet, right? So all of those things are benefits that come from that feature. But that still isn't value necessarily. I mean, all of those things are things that I am receiving as a result of that feature, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I value those. So when I really want to turn that into value, this is where we get into taking the benefit and saying, what result does that give me? So if I could have multiple streaming devices in my home at the same time, working at the same time, what result do I get from that? Well, what I get from that is that my kids are not complaining, right? Or I'm happier, or I'm able to watch shows that I wouldn't have been able to watch before. So those are the actual results. That's where the value lives, is in the result I'm getting from the benefit. And so if you start with features, move to benefits, then think about the results or the value that you get from that. That's, I think, where value proposition lives. Now, sometimes that value is going to be quantitative, meaning that I can measure it. So in the B2B world, that happens quite a bit. So if I have a feature that saves labor or saves money, right? The feature is whatever it is. The benefit is that it saves money. And then the result is whatever money it's saving. So maybe it's saving $100 an hour or something like that. So now that's a quantifiable result that I'm getting, which means that the value proposition can be quantified. That's not exclusive to business, but it happens a lot there because a lot of times the types of products that businesses are buying, they're buying for some quantifiable reason, right? Because they're trying to save money, save time, reduce their costs. Maybe they're trying to generate more revenue. So all of those things could be quantifiable. When you're talking about consumer-based products, that's a little harder. Of course, sometimes we buy products for those reasons as well, but a lot of times we as consumers buy products because it just makes us happy. It makes us feel good. We get something emotionally out of that product. And that is a form of value proposition as well. We'll kind of refer to that more as a qualitative form of value. So it's harder to define, but it definitely still exists. So that's a pretty obvious kind of definition of value, is when you tie it back to the value proposition. But I also wanted to talk about how we translate that now into pricing, because there's another commonly used form of value, or common use for this terminology of value in the business world, and that is in regards to value-based pricing. So the idea behind value-based pricing is that rather than a company pricing its products or services based on the cost and the margin they want to make, which would be a pretty common way to price things, right? I can make a widget for $1. I want to make 50% on it. So then I price at the cost of $1 plus 50% margin, and that becomes the actual price of my product. We would typically refer to that as cost plus pricing. And again, it's a common way to do it. Not necessarily the most effective way, though, because when you're pricing based on your costs and what you want to make, you're not taking into consideration what customers would be willing to pay. And that kind of can work against you in two ways. It could work against you in the form of maybe customers aren't willing to pay as much as you want to make, in which case you're not going to sell anything. Or it could work against you in the form of maybe customers would have been willing to pay more than you wanted to make because the product adds a lot more value to their lives. And in that case, you left money on the table. So cost plus pricing, although very common, is not necessarily the most effective way to price. A more effective way to price, at least in my opinion, is value-based pricing, which is starting with what is the value that you're bringing to your customers, and then price your product based on that value, and then use your margin and your cost as a checkpoint to make sure you're making an adequate amount of money based on that value. So that, I think, is a really great use of this terminology and this word value when we apply it to value-based pricing. And in that way, you can really equate it very much back to the value proposition, because what you are evaluating in value-based pricing is what is that value proposition worth. And so that's kind of how this whole thing would go. Now, of course, if you have a quantifiable value proposition, it's going to be a little easier to quantify that value in terms of value-based pricing. If, on the other hand, you have a qualitative kind of value proposition, touches more on the emotions and feelings and things like that, that's a lot harder to get your hand around. So in that case, you'd have to kind of ask customers, what do you think this qualitative value is worth to you? And then you can kind of take it from there. Now, it's important to note that when you're doing value-based pricing, although you're using the value proposition as a base for your pricing, you're not necessarily pricing your product based on the entire value of the value proposition. This gets a little tricky, but I'll try and illustrate this as much as I can. So let's say, I'm a B2B company, and by going with your product is going to save me, $10,000, right? Over the course of whatever time period I want to evaluate it. Let's say it's a year. So $10,000 over a year. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to price my product based on the full amount of that value. Because if I do, then the customer's not getting anything from it, right? So if I price my product at that $10,000 that the customer is saving, then they're not getting anything. They're not saving anything, right? So it's really important to differentiate that when you're doing value-based pricing, you want to look at the total value that something is bringing to a customer, but you don't necessarily want to price your product based on the full value that they're getting. You probably want to price it somewhere beneath that. So it's important to recognize sometimes people will think about value in terms of what somebody is willing to pay. I think that is missing a big component of what value truly is. Value is what people are receiving. What they're willing to pay is something probably less than that. Again, you could use the value proposition as a base for understanding that, but I would not use the term value as what someone is willing to pay, because I think usually customers are getting more value than what they're actually willing to pay. So just wanted to talk about that, discuss those terms of value a little bit in it, hit on value proposition, hit on value-based pricing a little bit, and see if that's interesting or if that drives some discussion. So if you have anything to talk about on this topic, or you have any questions about this, feel free to get in touch with us through the website. You can go to dearstrategy.net or dearstrategy.com. When you get to the website, use that ask a question or contact link that's up in the upper corner. I think it's up in the upper right corner. I can't even remember anymore, but you'll find it. And then you can send the message. Comes right to me. And also on that site, all the podcast episodes are listed, and there's a place that you can make comments for each individual episode. So that's another way that you can get in touch. And while you're doing all that, don't forget to make time for the plan. We'll see you back here on another episode of Dear Strategy. Thanks for joining.